here's the biggest problem that we have here, guys. EcuTech by design can run boost control. The problem is that this car is in an emissions county, and he needs to have all the emission stuff working. So rear O2 sensor, EGR, the PCV system, like all that stuff needs to work. Now we can modify it and add the turbo stuff, and there's no problem with it, so long as all the emissions equipment is there. And this car actually has it all. The problem is that in order for us to run the boost controller on EcuTech, we have to remove the charcoal canister purge valve, I believe. And so that's part of the emission system. So if we remove that, it's going to fail emissions. Now, when I say emissions, I know it sounds really scary, but our emissions here in Texas is not anything remotely close to like what you hear about California. So long as everything is working, you can have one readiness monitor off and it'll still pass. So it's not really that big of a deal. But here's the problem. When we're turning up the boost on this car, because it is going to be flex fuel, we have to have a way to turn the boost according to our flex fuel content. So there's one way of doing that, and we could just leave the 93 tune on 9 pounds of boost and then turn it up on E85. The problem is that when you do that, the customer still has to be able to adjust it. So like, and another thing too to keep in mind is that if it's tuned for on E80 to run, say 20 pounds of boost, what does he do when it's at E40? You know, he'll have to sit there and do the math to figure that out. And we don't want that. You know, the less things that you can mess with, the safer this car is going to be. So we've got to find a boost controller that's going to allow us boost based off of our flex fuel content. And so we did find something that's really promising here. There is one boost controller that I did find that I've used before, but it's been a long time, that would allow a 0 to 5 volt input. So the cool thing about that is that we have the Zaytronics flex fuel kit down here, this guy and here. So I'm gonna have to fish this guy out here, or try to fish it out anyways, but there should be a 0 to 5 volt output on this that we should be able to wire into that boost controller's input. Okay, so good news here. Whoever installed this, they just kind of taped up these wires here, or they put a heat shrink on it. So what we're gonna use is, I'm gonna figure out which wire it is, but we're basically going to route one wire out, and that one wire will go into the new boost controller for the 0 to 5 volt input. And so what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to run our boost based off of flex fuel content. Now on paper, this should work. And a lot of times, unfortunately, on the aftermarket stuff, things on paper work, but in actuality, they do not. So we're gonna test it out. Now, the cool thing about this boost controller as well is that it can actually handle its own flex fuel sensor. So if it came down to it, and it would look ugly as hell, but if it came down to it, we could run another flex fuel sensor in between what we've already got now. So we could basically cut a hose somewhere, put another flex fuel sensor in line, and then just make sure that the flex fuel sensors read the exact same. You know, so if the one from the Zaytronics reads E50 and the one on the boost controller reads E50, we're good to go. But ideally, it's far better. There's less moving parts if we can actually set this up through the sensor output wire into the input wire. Okay, so the Cortex EBC made it, and this thing is awesome. So I just kind of wanted to do like a little unboxing video of it. So you got actual paper instructions. Now this is technically an accessory for the boost controller, so it technically does not come with the base kit, if you will, but we'll go over this here in a quick second. So the EBC itself, they give you vacuum lines. That's this thing here. So USB cable, the actual unit itself, a nice little loomed wiring harness, a couple zip ties and fittings and plastic tees, and even a fuse tap, and then of course the 3 or 4 port. So the 3 port is optional, so you can buy it without a solenoid, with a 3 port, or with a 4 port. So that's all there. And this is the main unit itself. So here's the display. It's got 2 little buttons here, and then all the connectors in the back, and a vacuum port. Anyways, so really cool setup there. Now I'd like to talk about this guy here. So this is the CB2, which is the CAN bus interface. And what we're using this for is to get RPM and speed. So you can use RPM and speed, you can get it from this, and this instruction sheet here shows kind of where you tap it to. And so on the Mazda cars, we'll be tapping it to the OBD2 port. So we've got, trying to do some figuring out here. We've got JT working on a design for us to mount our Cortex boost controller. So our boost controller is sitting right over here. I know it's kind of hard to see because of the reflection since we're going through the windshield. So we're thinking about moving the gauge that they have for the flex fuel into that same area as well. So they have it mounted right here behind the behind the switch. But if you guys are sitting here in the car, right, we're gonna assume that you guys are sitting somewhere around here. The gauge is right here. You can't see it. Now ethanol, do you have to see it all the time? No, not really. But I mean, it's kind of like a really poor way of mounting it. I mean, they used some Velcro here. That's not even doing its job. Now the problem is that the wire is a little bit too short for this, and the Zaytronix gauge actually uses like a old school phone cable. Now for your younger viewers out there, you guys probably don't know what it's like to have a phone that used to be attached to a wall. And yes, believe it or not, it's true. So, and this is actually what it looked like. My thoughts are one of two. I can either A, get a cell phone cord extension type deal, which they do make, I think, or they used to make. I don't know if we can still get one anymore. But the thing is, we don't know if it's actually cabled correctly. I would assume that it's just a one-to-one, so it shouldn't matter too much. So my other thought though is to bring this and mount it inside with the rest of the electronics inside. Okay, so as you can see, the interior is somewhat apart here. Like I said, JT is making us a pod that goes here now. So I'm gonna work on removing the radio out of this.
A few moments later.
Okay, so fortunately enough, because I had an aftermarket radio, there was no need to pull this panel off. I stuck my head underneath here, and normally there's two bolts that hold that go into the actual radio itself, but with an aftermarket one, it's not retaining those. So it literally was the panels and these screws, and it just came right out. So obviously I've got a bunch of stuff unplugged here. So all right, so looking through the windshield, you can see that there's quite a bit of room down there. It's hard to catch on video, but you can definitely get your hand through here. I don't know if there's my finger there. So there's definitely enough space to run wiring and hoses and all that stuff through. So that's definitely a good sign there. So now there's actually a bigger reason why I wanted to tap into the radio side here. So the CAN bus interface here, right, is normally tapped into the OBD2 port, but the factory radio actually had CAN bus going into it, and I'm assuming it's for like the steering wheel controls. I'm assuming, I'm not 100% sure. Now, if we can tap this into the factory CAN bus wiring here, that's going to save us a lot of problems. The good thing is that this actually has an LED here to check, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna temporarily wire this up into the radio CAN bus here, and we're gonna test it to see if it actually works. If it works, we're gonna move forward with getting everything installed here, and there's ample space down here. There's lots of crevices and stuff, and this, fortunately enough, the CB2 is not a huge module. All right, so my original plan kind of failed, and I'll tell you why. So there's two versions of this radio, or this car, that with two different radios rather. And so one version has CAN bus and the other only has steering wheel controls. Ours unfortunately does not have CAN bus, but that's actually led me to something else. So I was going through the diagram and I found out that there is actually a steering angle sensor on these cars. And again, it's just like the radios, some of them have them, some of them don't. So this car does not have traction control, so I'm assuming it doesn't have the steering angle sensor. And so here's the connector for the steering angle sensor. It was actually tucked into the harness up here, not plugged into anything, because this car apparently doesn't have it. We've got the wiring for the boost controller kind of ran through. We got the Zaytronix ZT2 box, and then we have the CB2, the CAN bus CB2 here. So the Cortex needs to connect to all of this, and all of this needs to connect to the chassis. So we've got power ground on everything. So power and ground on the ECA, power ground on the CAN bus, and power ground on the Cortex itself, right? And then from there, these two will get connected to the factory CAN bus wiring, and then some of the wiring from the Cortex will go into the CB2 and the ECA. And that's how this is going to get flex fuel, RPM, and speed all into this, is based off of these two modules here. So I'm not running anything just yet. I'm not tapping any of this in just yet. My main concern is drilling a hole into the firewall, because all this stuff is going to be underneath the dash, with the exception of the Cortex itself, which is going to go into our design 3D pod to replace it, and then obviously the ethanol gauge itself will go there as well. I wanted to go over some of the notes here really quick that I'm kind of concerned about though. Okay, so on the CB2, on the instructions here, they give you like this stages, right, of what the LED should do when you first key it on. So basically when you key on, or when it first gets power, both LEDs light up for approximately 1 second. Green LED starts to listen for CAN bus data. The red LED indicates CAN has been detected. And then once vehicle type is determined, the green LED should pulse when the vehicle is driven, the red LED should stay on. But here's the problem with that. The problem is that on this note here, it says all 4 wheels must be turning when testing the vehicle. So hopefully we don't have to do that. Maybe that's just a general thing, that it's looking for like front or rear speed sensor, hopefully. Unfortunately, we do not have, the car's in gear, its speedometer's reading, but as you see, the green LED is not flashing. So that tells me that the instructions are correct, that all 4 wheels have to spin. So it's been running for, you know, maybe a minute or two, but you can see that the speed's not changing. So that's not ideal. It's not the end of the world though. So that just means that we won't have boost by gear at the moment. But so long as we have an RPM input signal, it's going to be totally okay. Again, not ideal. It does kind of suck. But the good news is that this is CAN bus. So we don't have, since we know that this is CAN bus working or reading, we should be able to get RPM signal out of this now. And so I think that's what we're going to do next, just to make sure that it's all good. So what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm just going to hook up the boost controller really quickly, see if we get an RPM input. So we have RPM set up here. It's not calibrated correctly, but it is working. So we know the CAN bus module is working. I tested this by setting up in the revs menu, and I can obviously rev it and it'll go up. So we just got to calibrate it. So that tells us that all this CAN bus stuff here is good to go. So what I'm thinking about doing as far as this stuff goes is I plan to just use some good old double-sided tape here. This side has the wiring diagram, which we can easily find online, so that's not a big deal. And I was thinking about just using some double-sided tape here just to keep everything secure. And the Zaytronics box has like these little tabs here for a zip tie. So if I do it this way, hopefully I can tap the CAN bus wires, the power and ground to each other, and then have less things connected to this. So that is the tentative plan. I don't know if that'll work out. Hopefully it does. All right, so first things first is we're gonna check for ethanol content here. Can input ethanol. Okay, so we've got 10% ethanol here. So that means that tapping it into this way works on one side. Now we've got to check the Cortex to see if we got RPM. So we, from our last video, we know that the RPM is not accurate because it needs to be set up, but it is changing with revs. So we do have that working. So I think we're good to go there in that sense. So we're gonna go ahead and start, now that we know that everything is working this way, we're gonna have to figure out where to mount all this and then run all the wires accordingly. All right, so a few hours later, we got everything all back in. So the wiring, I'm not super duper proud of, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. There's way too much going on. So I had to zip tie it in here. And I guess it'll be okay for now, but I'm not super thrilled with it. So the box is up here, but it is out of the way and I don't think it's going anywhere. What's interesting though is I did find a wire nut here I don't know if you guys can see that. I didn't do that, but someone threw a wire nut in here. Everything is all wired up now. So I still have to do all the engine bay side of it, but we've got the wiring done for the most part. We still have to just feed the gauge down here, but we can't do that until the new boost controller, or excuse me, the new gauge pod is printed and done. Then we can start putting this all back together. Now all I have to do is tackle the engine bay side of it,